Americans who do not now currently own a home, or maybe they own one home, but maybe the spouse has never bought one or hasn't bought one recently, and so now they can buy a second home to take advantage of this risk-free speculation. But what you can do now, the government is telling you, hey, buy this house. It's not going to cost you anything, right? You don't have to come out of pocket one nickel. Just sign here, and now you own a home, and you can take out an adjustable rate mortgage where, the rate is very low. You don't have to worry about the rate going up in the future because who cares? I mean, if the rate goes up, well, just stop making the payments, right? I mean, you can move out. I mean, what's the point? I mean, under normal circumstances, if you actually have to put a down payment, right? You actually have to take your hard-earned savings and use that money to buy a house. When you're doing that, you don't want to lose the money that you worked so hard to save. So you're not going to commit to a mortgage that you may not be able to afford, right? So you're going to want to find a fixed rate mortgage that you know you can afford, and then maybe buy a less expensive house so that you don't risk losing the down payment that you worked so hard to save. But if you don't have to put anything down, if you've got nothing to lose, well, then buy the biggest house that you can get approved for. And if you have to fund it with an adjustable rate mortgage, so what? Because now you get to live in a nicer house. And if interest rates do go up in the future and you can't afford to make the payments, well, it's no big deal. That's not your problem anymore, right? You could just stop making your payments. In fact, the deal is actually better than that, because let's say somebody is a renter right now, right? So they're going to qualify for this program and they're paying rent. The government may actually give them a better deal where they can buy a condo, right? And put nothing down, and then their payments on their adjustable rate mortgage could actually be less than what they're now paying in rent. So why not buy? Especially if you get out of your lease, you can get your deposit back. Usually when somebody rents an apartment, they have to come up with last month, a security deposit. So you don't need any of that to buy a house under this program, right? So you get all your deposit money back, your last month rent, you put that in your pocket, and now you buy this house, and buy in quotes, because buy means you're actually spending money. You're not spending anything. You're just getting a free house thanks to the government. All you have to do is make the mortgage payments and then, make the property taxes and the maintenance. But you're not actually required to do any of that, because if you ever feel like not doing it, you just stop. Because one of two things are going to happen to that house that you got for free. One thing is the house goes up in value. Well, that's a windfall. Ka-ching, right? Potentially you sell it and you make a profit, or maybe you take out a loan against the equity that just got built up in your free house. So you can't do that when you're renting. You don't have a free option when you rent. That's basically what the government is giving everybody. It's a free call option on a house, but you get to live in the house. If the house goes up, you get to keep whatever profits, either again by selling the house or just taking out a loan against this equity that you got for nothing. On the other hand, what if the real estate market tanks and the house goes down? Well, you don't lose anything. You didn't put anything down. Now, you have two choices. You can either continue to make the payments on the house, even though you're underwater, right? You owe more than the house is worth. You can keep on making those payments and hope the house, the housing market improves and turns around, right? You could do that, or you could decide, screw it, I'm just going to stop making my mortgage payments. And while I'm at it, I'm not even going to pay my property taxes. And, I'm not going to bother with all this small maintenance, because who gives a damn? Because it's not really my house. The house belongs to the bank or the government. I'm just living here. You can decide to do that, and it probably will take the government 2 to 3 years, maybe more, to get you out of that house. I mean, especially if you complain, I'm not making my mortgage payments because of COVID. I'm sick. I'm afraid to get sick. I don't know, whatever kind of excuse you come up with. I'm sure they're not going to want to kick you out of your home if you're sick, or you're worried about getting sick or something like that. So you have a very good chance, if you take the government up on their program to get a free house, that you may end up living in that free house for many, many years without having to come up with a nickel in payments. And this, of course, is going to end up hurting the local community, because if you're not paying your property taxes while you're sitting in that house, because they're not going to do anything about it. They're probably going to wait for some type of foreclosure or something. I don't know how long it would take the county to foreclose on a home because you're, owe back property tax. It would probably just, build up on the home. So when the government finally kicked you out, or the lender finally kicked you out and was able to foreclose, the property tax would come first. So it would just exacerbate the losses to the lender, which of course, the loans are all going to be guaranteed probably by the U.S. government anyway. So again, it's the taxpayer or the holders of U.S. dollars that end up losing under those circumstances. But in the meantime, this is going to fuel all sorts of demand for houses, and it is going to help push housing prices up because now you have all these buyers coming in to buy their free homes with government money. That enables some people who own the lower end homes to sell those homes to the so-called first-time buyer, and now they can trade up. They can take this money and use it to buy a more expensive home. So the whole real estate market benefits when you goose the lower end with these credits. So maybe they're hoping to really reflate a gigantic housing bubble. I mean, forget about how bad the last one was when it popped. They don't care about that. They just want bubbles because when you can't have legitimate economic growth, bubbles will do when that's all you can inflate, and that's all they can create by printing money. They don't get any real economic growth. They just can inflate asset prices. And to the extent that Americans could leverage those inflated asset prices by borrowing money, then they can spend it. And as long as we're counting the spending and ignoring all the debt, we can all pretend that we have economic growth when actually all we have is inflation. But I also want to talk about the fundamental value of a down payment because, this whole program of, giving people $15,000 to buy a home, a lot of it is predicated on the fact that homes are so expensive. And therefore, it's hard for people to save up enough money for a down payment. Well, first of all, why are homes so expensive? One of the reasons is because of all these government subsidies. It's government guaranteed mortgages, artificially low interest rates that are the reason home prices are rising. So if the government stopped all this inflation, and in fact, if they got out of the business of guaranteeing mortgages, home prices would fall dramatically, and then it would be cheaper to buy them, and so you wouldn't need as big a down payment, right? It's the same thing with student loans. Why is college tuition so expensive? Because the government guaranteed the loans that the students took out, and that enabled them to borrow a lot of money that they couldn't ordinarily borrow, and then they took all that money and they bid up tuition. And now the government is directly loaning money to students to buy college and bid up tuition. Well, if those loans didn't exist, then the colleges would have to slash their prices and they'd have to cut costs to make that possible so they could actually have customers. Well, the same thing would happen with housing. Without all these government supports, houses would be a lot less money, at least the existing homes, right? The new homes, a lot of that depends on the cost of construction, which is skyrocketing right now, which is another reason that these existing homes are more expensive because replacing them is getting more expensive. But the ones that are already here, if the government got out of the way, the prices would in fact come down. But there are some particularly important roles that the down payment has. And to the extent that the government can make it possible for people to buy homes without a down payment, that is a mistake. You can't simply say, oh, this is not a good situation because people don't have enough money to buy a house, so we need to let them buy houses without money. You have to realize how important it is to the whole process that the person buying the home have skin in the game. Number one, home ownership is expensive, right? Owning a home is more expensive than renting, right? Because when you own a home, you have to cover all the maintenance, all the things that go wrong. I mean, you buy insurance, but there are deductibles and there are co-pays and not everything is insured. And there's a lot of expenses. So home ownership is not for everyone. Renting is much easier, right? You don't have crazy expenses. When you're a renter, you know what your expenses are, right? You have a rent, maybe it's $1,000 a month, that's your rent. Anything goes wrong with the property, it's your landlord's problem. Landlord's got to fix it. You don't have to fix it. You have a set amount of money that you have to pay. Right? The landlord deals with all the headaches. When you own the home, you're your own landlord. You deal with all the headaches. And all of a sudden, something goes wrong with that house and there's a major expense that comes up. You got to pay for it. Now, where do you get money to pay for unexpected expenses? Well, generally you should get it out of savings, right? So if you're a homeowner, you should also have savings that you can tap into in case something goes wrong with your home. The savings are not important or as important if you're a renter because you kind of have a known rent. I mean, maybe your landlord can increase your rent, but not during the term of the lease. And generally when they increase the rent, I mean, it's, a certain percentage. And if it's too much, you can move out and look for another place. But when you can have unexpected large expenses, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 expenses, you need to have savings to tap into. Well, one way to know if a potential home buyer is going to be able to have savings is to see if they've saved up enough money for a down payment, because that shows that they're savers. They're going to be able to maybe afford to own the home. It's not just about affording to buy it. It's being able to afford to maintain it. That's key to home ownership. So if I'm a lender and I'm going to lend money to somebody to buy a house and, they're only putting down 10 or 20%, right? And so I'm on the hook if they don't pay. I want to make sure that they take care of that collateral. I don't want that home to get all run down because that's my collateral if they stop paying. So I have to know that these guys can save money. These guys will be able to maintain this property. So the fact that they were able to save up a down payment is a good sign that they're savers. They know how to live, beneath their means, and they may be able to build up a rainy day fund to cover these expenses. But when you let people that have no savings, that have never saved a nickel, that are living paycheck to paycheck and don't have, two dimes to rub together, and you say, hey, you can buy a house. Well, what's the odds that if they couldn't save up money to buy a house, that they're now going to be able to save up money to maintain that house? I mean, the only way they will be able to cover any of these expenses is if they can borrow the money somehow. Number two is skin in the game, right? You don't want to give somebody a heads they win, tails you lose scenario, right? You want to make sure that people, A, are not going to buy more house than they can afford, and B, once they own the house, they are committed to not only repaying that mortgage, but maintaining the quality of that property. Why? Because they've got skin in the game. They saved up a down payment. It may have taken them years to save it up. They don't want to lose it. They own that property. They have a vested interest. And of course, the down payment is the first to go, right? You take the first loss. So let's say you buy a house and you put 10% down and the house goes down 20% and then it gets sold. You lose 100% of your down payment. The bank, right, if they loaned you 90%, and they foreclose and they get back 80%, well, they lost 10%, right? Or if they loaned you $500,000, let's say, to buy the house, and you put up 50 or something like that, and the house is only worth 400,000 when they sell it, you lose your entire 50,000. The bank loses 50,000 of their 500. So the bank loses 10%. You as the borrower, you lose 100%, right? Because you are on the hook for the initial decline. So when you put up a down payment, a decent down payment, you have a vested interest in maintaining that property. And the lender knows it, right? You guys are kind of partners because you both see risk. Now, the bank ultimately has more risk because, you've got to put there, because if the house goes down by 50%, well, mail in the keys, right? I mean, you don't have to, the bank is out of luck there, right? Or the taxpayer. But if you put nothing down, then you're not in partnership with that bank at all. I mean, you don't have anything to lose if that property goes down. Now, on the other hand, you've got something to gain if the property goes up. In fact, you've got everything to gain if the property goes up. If the property goes up, you keep all the gain. The bank, the lender, doesn't get any of it, right? If a bank loans you $500,000 to buy a house and you put up 50 or whatever, and then the house goes to $1 million and you sell it, all you got to do is give the bank back the 500 that they loaned you. You keep the other 500 profit. That's all your money, right? So you get everything if the house goes up. And now with this $15,000 down payment, obviously, I guess you can't buy a $500,000 house with $15,000 down. I don't know. Hope not. I mean, but maybe you could buy a $250,000 or $300,000 house with that down payment. But probably the house ain't worth that. But they'll probably inflate the value because they know you're going to get the government money to help close it. But the point is, you get all the upside and you get none of the downside. At least with a decent down payment, you get some of the downside. And therefore, that's going to cause people to be more likely to pay the mortgage, maintain the value of the house, right? And think twice before they commit to something they may not be able to afford. But you give somebody a situation where they're gambling with the house's money from day one, literally, right? They're going to take it. That is a huge moral hazard. So everybody can buy the house. Nobody needs any money. And everybody has a free call, right? If the house goes up, everybody wins. And meanwhile, you can borrow against it. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people who got this $15,000 to buy a house, as soon as the home closed and they got it, maybe they can go right to the bank and take out a home equity loan and actually borrow that $15,000 right out. For all I know, that's what's going to happen. So not only do they get the free house, but they get the cash to boot to spend it on whatever they want. And the whole idea that the government should give people money to buy houses makes no sense. I mean, why should they do that? Nobody has a right to own a home. Why not just rent a home if you can't afford to buy? Rent. In fact, for most Americans, renting is a better deal than buying. But the government now is going to try to discourage people from renting when renting is probably a better, more economical choice for them. And instead, it's encouraging them to do something that under normal circumstances they would not do. You're always going to have the best outcome if market forces determine which option you choose. The minute the government comes in to distort your decision by favoring one particular choice over another, well, then you're no longer making the optimal choice. And this is what the government's doing by encouraging a lot of people to buy houses they can't afford, to commit to payments they can't make, all because they've skewed this playing field where they got this free option and ability to make money and borrow money. Again, remember, you don't have to sell your house. So if you live in one of these free houses that you got, to the extent that it appreciates, you can borrow money and you can keep living there and you can keep on borrowing as the price of the house is going up, right? You can keep on taking out more loans. And then when it eventually comes crashing down, if that's what happens, well, you don't have to give back any of that money. Right? And in fact, what happened during the last crash, and this is something that I forecast was going to happen before it happened, is that a lot of these people who end up having their homes foreclosed on before the bank actually takes over, or the government, whoever ends up getting the house, they gut the place. They start ripping out whatever's nailed down. I mean, they take out the appliances, they take out the countertops, they take out the copper, right? Look at the copper, look at the plumbing. They can sell that stuff, right? A lot of this stuff has value because after all, people look at it as, hey, I own this home. I could do whatever I want with it. I could put, all the stuff that I own for sale. I can list it all on eBay. Hey, you need any faucets, plumbing, whatever you need, I'll sell it. And so, you end up, the bank gets the house back and there's nothing there. It's just, walls, or, maybe they even take that out and it's just a facade, or just the outside of the house. Or I guess you could, if it's, you could take off the shingles if it's a wood house. I don't know. But a lot of this stuff ends up happening. And especially when people have lived in the house for many, many years without making any repairs, it's dilapidated anyway by the time the lender actually gets what's left of his collateral back. So the bottom line on all this is that the government wants to recreate all of the conditions that helped inflate the bubble that popped in 2008. Actually, I think it popped in 2005, and which led to the 2008 financial crisis. In fact, I just read that it was just now, maybe within the last week or two, that national home prices finally took out the high that was established in 2005. That was really the peak of the last bubble, even though it didn't blow up really until 2007. That's when the subprime blew up. But of course, after subprime blew up, they tried to tell us not to worry, right? It was contained to subprime. The rest of the market imploded in 2008. Well, we finally exceeded that peak. And that's before we've got this new program. So we've got these rock bottom adjustable rate mortgages. And even though the yields, as I stated earlier, are rising on 10-year and 30-year, which means that mortgage rates for a 30-year fixed are likely going up, the Federal Reserve has got short-term rates at zero, right? So that means the ARMs are not budging at all. And as long-term rates move up and as housing prices continue to move up due to these dynamics and inflation, more and more people are going to fall into that tender trap of the adjustable rate mortgage. They're going to have no other way to buy a house they can't afford other than with an adjustable rate mortgage. And of course, without a down payment to lose, who cares, right? They're going to roll the dice when they're playing with the house's money.